All right, Shalom Aleichem. Welcome to our class on Yalkut Yosef. We would like to continue from where we started, from where we stopped. Dinei Netilat Yadayim, the halachot of washing your hands after someone cuts their nails, and we'll jump into a few more topics of when you have to wash your hands. So we ended with saying like this: Hanotel tzipornav, whoever cuts his nails, afilu notal et kulam tzarich netilat yadayim. Even if someone did not cut all of his nails, he just cut off one nail. By the action of cutting off a nail, you have to do a netilat yadayim, reminding you this netila is not a netila with an atlan. It's just a netila with doing the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And even if you did not cut your own nails, you were tired, somebody came and cut off your nails for you, you still have to do the netila. Because it doesn't go on the cutter, it goes on the person that his nails were cut. Same thing with the feet. It's not just fingernails, but also nails of the feet. Those also deserve a netilat yadayim. In parentheses, he says, however, if you're going to cut off someone else's hands, that does not require a netilat yadayim from you. Let's give an example. Somebody has a little child, and he's cutting off his toenails or fingernails. So over there, since he's just cutting off their nails, he's not required of netilat yadayim. This is, of course, under the assumption that he did not touch his feet and under the assumption that it was not done in a bathroom. But if it was done in a bathroom, or if he did touch places that are usually covered and usually have sweat on them, then he needs to do netilat yadayim for a different reason. But in regards to washing your hands because of cutting off nails, it's only when you cut off your own and not when you cut off others. He says there's no difference if you cut him with your hand. I don't know how that's possible, but imagine someone has like a nail that's a little loose and he pulls it off with his hand, or if you use the clipper or scissors. Either way, by the action of cutting off, you need to do netilat yadayim to wash your hands. And even if you took off half a nail, still do netilat yadayim. Now, regarding someone that bites his nails, and sadly, but we see a lot of people that are doing that. They're biting off their nails. And I'm saying sadly because it's known that the nail is an area of tum'ah. It's somewhere where the tum'ah stays, the impurity stays. So therefore, it's not necessarily recommended to do it with your teeth. But assuming that people do it, do they have to do netilah? Is it considered that they cut off their nails? So the Yalkut Yosef brings a machloket over here. Says the Yalkut Yosef that the Gaon HaChazon Ish says you do not have to do netilah. But he brings an earlier rabbi, the Rashbetz, that he says that if you do cut off your nails, even with your teeth, even if you did not take off a whole nail, just a piece of the nail with your teeth, you do have to wash your hands. All right. Now regarding someone that just got a haircut, right? And he writes here, assuming that you got a haircut in the kosher way, meaning some people cut off their sideburns, this area, you're not allowed to cut it on a zero level, right? You have to have a little length over there, something that you're able to grab. But assuming you got a kosher haircut, you have to wash your hands. Now what happens if I'm cutting my nails and my window is right next to the kanisa and I hear now a kaddish, right? Or I hear a beracha. Do I answer amen or do I answer for the kedusha? He says, of course you should answer and you shouldn't be strict. So why would we think to be strict? Because what's the idea? When we cut off our nails, again, there's an evil spirit, the ruach ra'ah that dwells, and therefore we have to wash our hands. So maybe since that evil spirit is on me, I'm not allowed to answer Kaddish or I'm not allowed to answer Amen. He says, no. First of all, you answer. And second of all, even if there is that evil spirit, he says it's a very ruach klusha, he calls it a very weak spirit. It's not like when someone goes to sleep, it's much weaker, and therefore no questions asked. We answer for Kaddish and Kedusha. Now, what about someone that touches areas in his body that are usually covered, like we mentioned before? So he says, even if you touch that area just with the tip of your fingers, you have to do netilat yadayim. He explains here that those are areas that usually have sweat and dirt, and therefore you have to wash your hands. Now, what happens when we touch shoes or sandals? So of course, you have to wash your hands. And even if you touch other people's shoes, you have to wash your hands. It doesn't have to do just with your shoes, any shoe. We'll see in a second why. But if someone touches socks that are clean, he does not require netilah. And why? What's the logic behind it? Why does a shoe require netilah? and not a sock? Is it not because the item is on your foot? We'll see. That's not the reason. שרק בנעליים שדורך על גבי קרקע. It says, what happens when you wear shoes? You step with those shoes on land. And I'm reminding you, there's two lands. There's the land that we have at home, which is with tiles on it. That's not the land he's talking about. He's talking about karka olam, outside, walking on the grass, walking on the mud, walking into that. That's called the land, right? That requires the shoe, that makes the shoe something that if you touch it, it requires you to wash your hands. Why? Because usually those type of shoes have tinuf, they have dirt, because you stepped on the ground and they collected dirt, and therefore when you're touching them, you collect that dirt, as well as another reason. There's a ruach ra'ah on the land. So when your foot touched it, it received that ruach ra'ah, that evil spirit, and now when your hand touched that, that's why you have to do netilah. And he brings the source. How do we know that there's a ruach ra'ah, evil spirit on the land? He says, because the pasuk says, these are the kelalot in Gan Eden, where the snake and Adam and Chava got cursed. One of the curses over there was, Arua ha'adama biglalecha. The land is cursed because of you. Let's remind us why. Why was the land cursed? Because Hashem told the tree to bring a etz peri, oseh peri, right? To be a tree that the flavor of the tree is the same as the fruit. Etz peri, oseh peri. The etz itself also had the flavor of a fruit. That's how it used to be. But after Etz Hadat happened, and we sinned, Adam HaRishon sinned, we were all part of that, right? There's a famous question, if Adam HaRishon sinned, why was the curse on all of us? From now on, you'll have to work hard for your money. Let Adam work hard. What do you want from me? And everybody says the answer. All our neshamot were inside the neshama of Adam HaRishon, and therefore we are all partners in the sin, and the curse goes on all of us. So we have to. One of the curses was that the tree no longer gives that flavor, but it used to be that the tree itself had the flavor of the fruit above the fruit itself. So aruma ha'agdama biglalecha, the land was cursed. Since the land was cursed, your foot, your shoe touched that land, and now you touch that shoe, you have to wash your hands. Aval begarbaim, he says, however, with socks, that before we said you do not have to wash your hands if the socks were clean. Why? He says, because en derech lalecht aleim ela al ritzpa nikiya, because the normal way that people walk with socks is not in the mud outside. You wear it in the home, right? Because of that, you don't have to wash your hands. It's naturally a cleaner thing. And there's also not an evil spirit on that because it didn't touch the land outside. Therefore, if someone puts on a sock or takes off a sock, assuming that there's no sweat over there, he does not need netilat yadayim. Same thing with the laces of the shoes. It's kind of a separate entity of the shoe, and therefore, the shoe touched the land. Even if it just touched with the bottom, you touch the top of the shoe, you have to do netilah. But if you touch the laces, they're kind of a separate entity inside that shoe, and they're considered clean. So if you only touch the laces, your shoelace opened, now you tie it up and close it, you are not required to do netilat yadayim. All right. Now imagine you're able to take off your shoes without touching them. Let's say a loafer, right? What do you do with loafers? You kind of push them off. So of course, you don't need to do netilat yadayim. Why is he mentioning this? Because a person may think, just the action of removing a shoe from myself requires a netilah. That's not the case. The case is the contact with your hand and that shoe. Oh, now I buy shoes in a shoe store. They're brand new. I try them on. Do I have to wash my hands? He says, no, as long as you did not touch your old shoes with your hand to take them off, to try on the new shoe. The new shoe does not require you to do netilah by touching it. Why? As we mentioned before, this new shoe did not step outside in the mud. It doesn't have the dirt. It doesn't have the ruach ra'ah. It hasn't stepped in the area that brings all those problems. Now someone has slippers at home. What type of slippers? So we'll see. He's going to differentiate. What about if it closes the foot on the back or it's completely open slipper? So he says, either way, if you touch those slippers, tzarich litol yadav kmo benogea b'min'alim. Take a sip of this coffee. So what does it mean? Tzarich litol yadav kmo benogea b'min'alim. Just like when you touch a regular shoe, slipper has the same din. You have to wash your hands. It says v'yesh omrim, but some say that if they don't cover your foot completely from behind, let's say, your toes and the back, so there's something closing. Let's say it's an open flip-flop where in the back there's nothing closing on it. It says, some say you're not required because when you remove a shoe like that, it's not considered a chalitza, a removal of a shoe, because it wasn't really there, right? It says, but minadin, if you touched it with your hand, you have to do the netilah. That's the halacha. By the way, he brings an interesting comment that I marked over here. הפוסקים כתבו כמה טעמים למה צריך ליטול ידיו בנגיעת מנהלים. Why do you have to wash your hands when you touch shoes? What was the reason? So he says, either it's because they're dirty, right? They stepped something dirty, or because there's sweat, they're full of sweat. They themselves got dirt from you, meaning the sweat, right? Or מצד הזוהמה נדבקת לנעל, or because of the dirt that glued to the shoe, or משום רוח רעה, or because of an evil spirit that dwells on the shoe, as we said, when you step on the mud. All right? He says, and therefore, all these reasons can happen with those slippers. Don't say, no, these are shoes that I only wear at home. Still, maybe that you sweat in them, maybe that they touch the ground outside, because you don't make a rule that you only wear it on tiles. You have to step outside, you come back in with those shoes. So for all those reasons, even though it's a home shoe, it still has the reasons, just like a regular shoe, why you need to wash your hands after that. Okay. Person now is shampooing his hair, or even without shampoo, but he's scratching his scalp, right? החופף שערות ראשו. Says צריך נטילת ידיים. That's one of the things that require netilah. But he says, ודווקא אם חיכך תוך השערות שבראשו. Specifically, if he scratched the hairs that are attached to his head. But if he just touched the hairs from far and he didn't make contact with the scalp, and tzarich netilat yadayim, that already does not require a netilat yadayim. The ein benegia b'se'ar zohama, because the hair itself, just by touching it, it's not considered zohama. It's not considered something impure. The impurity comes when you dig in, right? So if you didn't dig in, your hands are not obligated to do netilat yadayim. What about a beard? That's the next topic. If you touch your beard, some say that you have to wash your hands, especially if it's very close to the skin and you have some sweat on it. And he says, but what if you just touched it softly and you didn't dig inside to your beard? Everybody agrees you don't need a netilah. But some say that even if you scratch into your beard, you do not do netilah. And he says, v'chen nohagim ha'olam. You sit in so many shurei Torah, you see the rabbi scratching his beard. It's kind of a meditation. Everybody that has a beard likes to touch it. That's the custom of the world. You want to see what the world does, go learn from that. The world touches their beard. No one goes and does netilah after that. And therefore, you're not required to do that. He says, especially if you're in the middle of your limud, someone is learning Torah and he's going like this to his beard. He's going to go now and do netilat yadayim. There's no requirement to do. And if you want to be strict, he said, okay, rub your hands, b'mila de menake, rub your hands against your body or something like that. Not your body, right? Your clothing, so that it's considered that doesn't have that on them anymore. But it's not a requirement. It's not mandatory, but it's a recommendation. Now regarding a haircut, he says, if you got a haircut, you need to wash your hands. Even if you didn't cut your own hair, you went to a barber, you didn't touch your hair, the barber did everything, you have to do netilat yadayim. He says, what happens if you're the barber? I'm cutting other people's hair. He also has to do a netilat yadayim after the haircut. He says, however, there's an exception. What's the exception? The halakha. If anybody has a 3-year-old son, when they cut their hair at the age of 3, it's the first cutting. So what happens? Everybody gets the scissors. You give them a little piece of hair to cut off. Just for that, for the little amount of hair that everybody removed over there, they're not required to do netilat yadayim. And if someone now has a shaving machine, think about it. It's just like cutting your hair, but you're cutting your beard. You have a shaving machine, right? So do you have to do netilah? He says no. If you're not doing it inside a bathroom, you're doing it, let's say, in a sink somewhere that's not a bathroom, there's no tumah over there, and you're shaving, there's no halachic requirement to wash your hands. He says, however, if you ask me, I do not recommend, he says here himself, cutting your beard with an electric machine, unless you've tested it and seen that he describes a description here, but I'm going to say it in our words, which basically means that it did not cut the hair so deep under the surface. It left a little bit of the hair. Because if you cut it so deep, then it's considered like a razor. So the kosher machines usually have a separator, something that gives a little distance from the actual skin. And even though maybe it's not visible in the eye, but that's considered kosher. But if it's deep, that's already a problem of a tal, of a blade, and that would be a problem. So today you have machines that have kashrut on them. I was in the Rav Ben Chaim's class a couple of weeks ago. Someone walked in with a shaving machine. Says, Rabbi, what do you say about this? The Rav took a look. Kasher, mutarim lachem. It's good to ask. But if you don't want to ask, there's certain machines that you could buy that already have the kashrut on them, especially here in Eretz HaKodesh. All right. Another case, lo alenu, when someone has to wash their hands. And soon we're going to explain why I'm saying lo alenu. Hayotze mi bet hakvarot, someone that leaves the cemetery, or someone that returns from a levaya. That person has to wash his hands. However, the halacha requires imamad michutz le'arba amot. But if you went to the cemetery, but you didn't walk inside the area of the graves, you were always at least 2 meters, 4 amot, 6 to 7 feet away from all the graves, velo nichnas lebet hakvarot, and you didn't walk into the cemetery where all those graves are, then you do not need to do the netilat yadayim. It says, yesh nogim lachmir bechol ofen, but some are strict. Regardless, they went to the cemetery, even if they didn't come close to the graves. No, I want to wash my hands. They want to, okay, good. You have a custom to do that, no problem. The Yeshanogim says, and some have a custom, they even wash their hands not only on the way out, but also on the way into the Bet Almin, to the Bet Kvarot. Says that's not a requirement. You don't have to do that. And now he says something very important. Everybody notice. En leharbot levaker bebet hakvarot. Don't think it's a good thing to go to Bet Hakvarot, to Bet Almin. Chas v'chalila, there's a levaya, we need to go. What? Shelo alenu. But people somehow think that it's a positive thing to go. I've seen sad cases of a soldier that passed away in the army, and his mother, maybe for 5 years straight, was going every day to the cemetery. She couldn't separate from her child, and we can't blame her. But Chachamim say it's not a healthy thing. Going to the cemetery, there's a lot of problems over there. It's not a good place to be. And listen to what the Gaon Mivilna says. V'tishmor shelo telech lebet hakevarot klal uchlal. It's better you don't go at all to the cemetery. Because over there's a lot of kelipot. Kelipot, we want to explain what does a kelipa mean. So the famous rabbi, Rabbi Meir Baal HaNes, his rabbi was Elisha ben Avuya. Elisha ben Avuya, at the end of his days, became anti-religious. He left the derech. Right? The Gemara says, Sifrei minut hayu noshrim mechiko. Books of philosophy were falling off of him like a tree and a leaf fell off. That's how many books of philosophy were falling off him. Philosophy at the time was describing the belief that there is no God, that the world is ancient, etc. Meaning he went off the derech. So when Rabbi Meir once saw him, he was still learning Torah from him. They asked him, Rabbi Meir, how are you learning Torah from a person like this? It doesn't work. He's already off the derech. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir, Rimon Matzah, he found a pomegranate. He ate the inside, the seeds of the pomegranate, v'klipato zarak, and he threw out the peel. Klipa means the peel, so that's the metaphor. But what does it really mean? It means like the impurity, the problems. So he was able to separate himself from the impurity, from the wrong views of Elisha ben Avuya, and he was only able to collect what was still collectible, the old Torah that was dwelling within him. So I'm saying this because Gaon Mivilna says that when you go to the cemetery, there are kelipot over there. There's the evil side, those negative things, those negative spirits dwell in the cemetery. The kol sheken benashim, and how much more so do women have to be careful not to go to the cemetery. The kol atzarot ve'avonot ba'im mizeh. Listen to this line, and all the problems and all the sins come from this. We should know women that go to the cemetery, they should avoid it as much as they can. And if they want to go, okay. How can you tell them no? But what's the problem? There are a few problems. One problem is they say that the woman is she that brought the death to the world because she gave the fruit to the forbidden fruit to Adam HaRishon. So they say she turned off the candle of the world, meaning she turned off the light of the world. She brought death to the world by feeding him that forbidden fruit. So what are you doing now in a place that death happens? It's not a place for you. Another reason that's more practical that we see every day, sometimes women don't exactly follow the proper halachot of tzeniut. If a woman walks into the cemetery in that matter, and someone is there because he's burying somebody and he sees something not tzanua and his mind takes him to a bad place, in that moment there's a lot of potential of problems happening to a person because of that. Meaning the woman has potential of being machshir et harabim, making people sin in a very bad place to do so, because of what the Gaon Mevilna is saying, that all the kilipot, all the negative forces are there. So that's a place where you have to be extra careful. In other words, unless you have to go to the cemetery, try to avoid it as much as you can. That's the recommendation of Yalkut Yosef based on the recommendation of the Gaon Mevilna. What happens in Kivrot Tzadikim? Someone wants to go to the Kivrot of Avraham Avinu, Kivrot of Yosef Karo, Ari HaKadosh, all these famous cemeteries, Bete Kvarot. What's the problem over there? Is there a problem? So he says, Anichnas lekivrot tzadikim. When you go to the grave of a tzaddik, like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and Yonatan ben Uziel, and Rabbi Meir Baal HaNes, Vekever Shimon HaTzadik, etc., En tzarich litol yadav. Over there, you do not have to wash your hands. In parentheses, he says, however, En litpalel shacharit mincha ba'arvit, but do not pray over there. V'gam lo b'kivrot tzadikim, even in the kivrot tzadikim, where you think it's a holy place, because the tzaddik is, when is there impurity? When the body was pulling towards bad, and the soul was pulling towards good. So there was always a war. And now that the neshama left the body, right, and the body is there, so there's impurity by going visiting. So we say, yeah, but the goof of the body of the tzaddik that the neshama left him was never impure to begin with, so there's no tumah on the body of the tzaddik. So what's the problem? Maybe we could go and pray there. Okay, the fact that there's no tumah is one thing, but praying there is a problem. So why? If the problem is not tumah, what's the problem with praying there? He says like this. The reason why we are allowed to pray in certain kivrot tzadikim, like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, or Kivrei Avot, Avraham Avinu, and Me'arat HaMachpelah. Why? Because over there the graves are very deep under the ground. Amok harbe, he says. Ve'no samuch. Right? And it's not close to the surface. But if the grave is close to the surface, there are a few problems. One of the problems is that by praying we're doing a mitzvah right now. But the metim, they cannot do mitzvot anymore, right? Like it says in Tehillim, Bametim chofshi. When someone passed away, he's exempt from mitzvot. They cannot keep mitzvot. That's why they say when someone goes to a cemetery, if his tzitzit is hanging out, even though us Sfaradim, usually our tzitziot are not out, we tuck them in. But if a tzitzit, say, is hanging out, then tuck it in. Why? Because the metim see it and they're envious. We can't do mitzvot. You're coming, showing off your mitzvot. So you're really going to pray on the grave, somebody is right there. So if you're doing a tefillah for his honor, you're reading Tehillim is one thing. But if you come there and pray shacharit now, well, you can't pray shacharit anymore. So don't do that to him. The reason why we're allowed to do it in Me'arat HaMachpelah, where Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are, or Kever Rabbi Shimon, because the grave is very deep and it's not in the area that creates that envy that we're talking about. And he writes another comment about Kivrot Tzadikim, because some people, for them, Kivrot Tzadikim is a big deal. He says, V'ra'ui lefarsem. This is a classic comment by Rav Yitzchak Yosef and from the family of Rav Ovadia Yosef. Ra'ui lefarsem ki limud Torah adif al nesiah al kivrot tzadikim. You should know that it's more important to learn Torah than to go visit a kever. How many people they leave yeshiva and they want to go visit kivrot tzadikim? He says, oh, it's much more important for you to sit and learn Torah. So who should go? No, if you're a person that you're not able to learn so much and you learned and you're tired and you're exhausted, but kivrot tzadikim gives you a certain energy, okay, go. But if you're able to sit all day and learn Torah, that's the approach of Rav Ovadia, the approach of his family as well. There's nothing greater than learn Torah. Do not neglect the Torah to go visit a tzaddik. A few more minutes for Baruch Hashem. All right. Now, even if I go to a cemetery of goyim, I need to wash my hands. Why wouldn't we need to wash my hands? Why wouldn't we need? Because as we explained before, when is there impurity? When something was pure and it left. A neshama of a Jew is pure, it left the body, now the body remains impure. But the goy, since he never had the purity, then when his neshama, his soul, whatever level it was, obviously it's a lower level, whenever it left him, there's no impurity over there. So why, if I'm going to a cemetery of goyim, do I have to wash my hands? He says you do have to. Why? In the comments he writes, Bishut, in Shelot Tshuvot, questions and answers, Yad HaLevi, says, She'af bebet kvarot shel goyim tzarich netila. You also need to wash your hands when you go to the cemetery of goyim. V'chen mashma biur agara. It's also apparent from the Perush of Gaon Mevilna. Shedima din ze ledora shel hametim. Why? He says, Have you ever heard of this? We're not allowed to do that, but it's called a seance, where they communicate with the dead. He says that's an impure thing. You're not allowed to do that. He says by going to a cemetery of the goyim, there's somewhat of that din of doresh el hametim. It's as if you're talking to the dead, and just because by talking to the dead you're doing that isul, that impure action, you need to wash your hands. It's not because of the impurity of the goy itself. It's because of you're going to somewhat talking to the dead, and therefore you should wash your hands. That's the pirush of the Gaon Mivina. Some have this custom, and I know almost everyone I know has this custom, that after they wash their hands when they visit a cemetery, they don't want to dry their hands. Why? So that they don't forget the person that passed away. The hands are not, well, usually they dry their hands. Why not? Oh, it makes them think about the dead and remember them. All right, so some do that. He says, but halachically, there is no problem. That's a custom. Some people have it, okay. But halachically, am I allowed to dry my hands? The answer is yes. He says specifically at winter time. You come back from a funeral in the winter, your hands are freezing. It's okay. Another custom, he says, regarding a cemetery is that if there are a lot of people online to wash their hands, so they fill the natlan, they do the natilah, and then they pass it to the next guy. So you never pass a natlan from hand to hand. The custom is to put it down and let them pick it up by themselves. But he says this too is not a halachic requirement. It's just a custom. Another custom, ונהגו להקפיד איך שאפשר שלא להיכנס לבית ואפילו לביתו עד שיטול ידיו. And some have the custom that they won't even go into a house, or so much more so to their house, until they wash their hands after a cemetery. And if you don't have anyone that could bring you water to the garden, meaning as you're about to end, let's say you couldn't find today we have faucets in all the cemeteries in Israel. Let's say you didn't do it and you remembered before you walk home, you want to wash your hands on the outside, but there's no one there to bring you a cup from inside to cup of water. You don't have to be strict on that. It's okay. You can go inside, wash your hands inside. החוזר מלוויה, אין לו ליטול ידיים מברז, שייך לאחרים מחשש לאיסור גזל. I couldn't find the faucet. Now, on the way home, I see my neighbor's faucet on the street. Am I allowed to go wash my hands over there? They're impure. It's just, better keep your impurity and not go over gezel, stealing from someone else. Of course, it's kind of obvious, but maybe not for everyone. Therefore, he finds a need to say it. Do not use someone else's faucets. הנוגע בגופו, someone that touched his body, צריך ליטול ידיו. You have to wash your hands. ואינו מטעם רוח רעה. The reason why? Not because of ruach ra'ah, not because of evil spirit, אלא משום זיעה, like we said before, because there's sweat there, there's dirt there, ולכן אם אין לו מים, או שיצטרך לבטל מלימודו לחפש אחר מים, די במקום, דמיל מנקה. It says, and therefore, if someone is learning Torah now, and his hands, he touched an area that's uncovered, if he doesn't have water, and in order for him to get water, he has to go somewhere until he gets water and come back because he's scratched his chest or whatever it is, right, in the middle of his limud. So a person like that, we exempt him from going and doing bitul Torah, wasting on. Instead, wipe his hands on something clean, like a towel, like a shirt, like an item like that, and then that would be sufficient. All right. Oh, I see. It's time. Rabotai, Besel Gamur. First of all, I want to say thank you that I know some of you are off, but we still had a class and recorded it today. Baruch Hashem, Tizku LeMitzvot. Inshallah, we'll put it on the chat so those that are away could listen to it. And Mizrat Hashem.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All the best. Shabbat Tov.
Wonderful day.
Thank you.